Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with a continuation of our Battletome analysis series that we're doing, focusing as a case study on OBR in general. This will be our second video on the battle line units, this time our conditional battle line units. But the previous two videos, so this is our third in total, were on the battle traits in general for the first video, and then the unconditional battle line, and before that, pitch battle profiles for the army in general. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and remind you guys that we always appreciate you liking, subscribing to the YouTube channel and the video itself, commenting underneath in the description, or below the description rather, and of course joining the Discord and keeping the conversation going there. So thank you in advance for continuing to support the channel. So as we've done before, here's our kind of like timeline of what we're doing in the series. We started off, like I said, with battle traits, and then now we're still in battle line units, but this is part 2. Thereafter, we'll be moving into the sub-factions, then the spell lore, the enhanceable heroes, the enhancements that can go on them, and then kind of the rest of the army, which we might still split up into a couple little bits. But just a reminder that the series goals here, that this is not supposed to be per se a Battletome review, as I mentioned on the third line there, but it's supposed to be more an experienced Battletome analysis, or rather a Battletome analysis from someone who's experienced breaking books down. Whether that's to learn new tricks for someone who does this all the time as well and just see how someone else does it, or for someone that's still trying to get their head wrapped around their own army. As such, it's perhaps a good tool to have when you're trying to learn a new book, either for an army you already know, or you're just getting started with a given army, or let's say the game in general. Because as we know, there are so many interactive rules here, and trying to get your head wrapped around all of it can be pretty daunting for some people. That said, this video isn't necessarily intended just for beginners. And as I say in the last line there, it's applicable to all armies, not just OBR. That's just the case study we're doing here.
All right, now let's move on to some conditional battle line, starting with the two kits of mid-elite guys. We have, obviously, in our Mortec Guard are our least elite of the iterable units, then moving up to the Cavala's Death Riders, arguably. And then we've got Immortus Guard and Necropolis Stalkers. Which, let me check the points values on those. For Immortus Guard is 3 for 200 and Necropolis Stalkers is 3 for 220. So we're getting more elite evidently as we proceed through the video. So Immortus Guard, we'll see here that they have an extra keyword, Hecatos. I don't know what that adds to this because I haven't seen reference to that keyword yet. And I'm looking down at the Necropolis Stalkers War Scroll, and they have it as well. So evidently, it means something. Sometimes the keywords are just for flavor. Sometimes they actually do something with the units, and sometimes they put them in there thinking maybe they'll do something with them later, maybe. So we know this is a unit of 3, and they've given them the elite keyword since they don't have a champion, but they wanted them to be able to issue commands to themselves. So that's cool. We can see here that's 5 wounds, so they count as 2 bodies on objectives. 5-inch move, so a little faster. 3+ save, so great. And 10 bravery. And then they have 2 abilities. If a friendly Ossiarch Bone Reaper's hero is within 3 inches of this unit, before you allocate a wound or mortal wound to that hero, or instead of making a ward roll for a wound or mortal wound that would be allocated to that hero, roll a dice. On a 2+, that wound or mortal wound is allocated to this unit instead of that hero and cannot be negated. So, this is the standard new wording that we see with bodyguard rules. This is what we call a bodyguard rule. Some of them are worded a little differently, especially if you go back to 2nd edition, but this is written in such a way as to make it clear that it's basically a ward save that you're making. So it's before you allocate a wound or mortal wound to that hero, so just a normal wound from attack profile or a mortal wound from whatever source, or instead of making a ward roll for a wound or wound roll that would be allocated to that hero. So the hero doesn't get their 6+ ward. And then it's worth pointing out, after this 2+, this wound cannot be negated if it's passed on to them, meaning no one's getting that 6+ ward from the death ward save. So this doesn't change their ability. In a sense, it makes them actually easier to kill, in the sense that you could choose. Now, let's see. Okay, well, hold on. I'm looking to see if we have a can. If a friendly is within 3 inches, or instead of making a ward roll a dice. On 2 plus that one is allocated to this unit. Oh, is. This is not a can. Must be passed on. Some bodyguard rules limit you so that you can't, or so they don't limit you, so you can choose whether you want the bodyguard to take it for the hero or not. If this guy is within 3 inches of a hero, and you don't want this unit to die for some reason, maybe for the number of models on objectives or something in its last turn, if you don't carefully keep them outside of 3 of the hero, they might end up taking the wounds that they target against the hero instead, even though they can't reach the hero. It's a small, subtle difference because it's still within 3 inches. It's functionally as though you're within combat of the hero, but of course that's not combat if it's your own friendly unit. But it's worth pointing out. And then crushing assault. You can use this command ability once per battle after this unit is fought for the first time in the combat phase. The command can only be issued by a model in this unit, and this unit must receive the command. This unit can fight for a second time in that phase. The strike last effect applies to this unit when it fights for that second time. Okay, so a number of things here. First, I'm going to mark that it's a command ability. It's good to know when you have these and what are static abilities and which are ones that you have to choose to turn on. So sometimes I like to notate that way. Okay. Once per battle. I always underline once per battle because that's good to know. Now, obviously, if you have time playing this army as the pilot of the army, you'll eventually learn that it's a once per battle thing. But it's good to point these things out. And it's after it's fought for the first time in the combat phase. Now, when it's once per battle, I don't say both here. I say either combat phase, meaning either that of your opponent or your own. It can only be issued by a model in this unit. They're all elite, so they can all issue it, which is different than what was happening with the other two unconditional battle line units in that their champion had to do it. So if your opponent finds a way to remove the champion from the unit, they can no longer do their command. And this unit must receive the command. They can fight for a second time in that phase. The strike last applies to this unit when it fights for that second time. So it's not fight immediately, and it's not fight. You get to activate a second time in the normal part of the combat phase. It's specifically at a strike last. So still good, but maybe not game changing. Okay, so now we've analyzed all the things. We see that none of these rules impact their save, and none of them impact their attack profile. So let's go ahead and do the save. So one way to do it is simply a 3+ save is a 3 times modifier. So that's 15, and then 15 times 1.2 for the ward save. And then 5 times 2 is 10, times 1.2 makes it 12. 5 times 1.5 is 7.5, times 1.2 is 9, and 5 times 1.2 is 6, and then that times 1.2 is 7.2. So they can absorb 18 wounds at no rend per model, which is not bad. And then their tax profile, remember, so they got 2-inch range, which is good because they got big bases. I don't remember if they're on 50s or bigger, but I think it's around a 50. It could be 40s, but I think it's 50s. And then 6, and then we use the multiplier here, which would be, this is 1 better. So that's, let's see, 6 times 20 over 36. So that's 3.33 a piece at -2. And again, you're paying 200 for that unit of 3 guys. There's no champion, so you're not getting any extra attacks. So functionally, 3 guys is doing, this is exactly 1/3 of 10. So you're doing, with 3 guys, 10 wounds against, or at -2. So if that's times a 4+ save, that's functionally 5/6 of it go through. So you're doing 8.33 wounds against a 4+ save with that unit. Not bad. Obviously, they're built to be a bodyguard. And then also fight again, which is kind of cool. Okay, let's take a look at the next unit. All right, so Necropolis Stalkers. This is 20 points more expensive. Let's see what's different. Let's take a quick look. I can already see that they're elite. They have the same keywords except Necropolis Stalkers is swapped out. They move 1 inch faster. They have 1 save worse. So they're faster but less tanky. All right, so these are the ones whose heads spin. So I thought both units did it, but it's just this one. And then, let's see, each model in a Necropolis Stalkers unit is armed with Spirit Blades. 1 in every 3 in this unit can replace their Spirit Blades with Dread Falchions. So I write here, this is a 1 in 3. That's kind of like your champion, but they technically don't have one. Okay. Quadrarch aspects. That's hard to say. At the start of the combat phase, you must pick one of the following aspects to apply to this unit until the end of that phase. Now this is always interesting because it's a must, and it's at both combat phases, and which is also the enemy combat phase. So you've really got to think about it, and it's a must. So it's weird when people get weird about going back on rules, because you have to pick this unit, but if you missed it, then it's weird because the rule says must. So how strict people can be, especially in tournament play with no takebacks, versus something like this that says must. Another way of looking at this that I like to look at the game is that if the computer had made this decision, it would never let you move to the next step without choosing it. So that's how I usually like to play. But anyway, because what they choose here might impact what your opponent's initiations or activations for the units are. But there are 4 abilities. 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1 is Blade Strike Aspect. Add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by this unit. I can already tell you right now this is going to make the calculations more complicated. All right. Number 2, add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target this unit. Of course, this is only until the end of that phase, which means it's only in the combat phase. 3, add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by this unit. And 4, add 1 to the damage characteristic of this unit's melee weapons. This just made doing the math on this extremely complicated. Usually you only see about 1, maybe 2 states that can buff a unit up. This is buffing them up a lot. So I don't know if I'm actually going to do the calculations on camera right now, but we can talk it out. And then we've got a command ability that's different than the other one. This one's called Hunt and Kill. You can use this command ability in your hero phase. The command can only be issued by a model in this unit, and this unit must receive the command until your next hero phase. This unit can run and still charge later in the turn. So this goes back to me talking about not getting the plus 3 inch movement from the generic Ossiarch command, because then you could have a unit that could run and charge. I didn't know for a fact there was a unit that could do it, but now that I see that, and this command happens in the hero phase, and that one happens in the movement phase, so you would have been able to do it, but it specifically says that it's only when you make a normal move. So you can still do it, but you won't get to use the run part, which means you might as well not do this one. Except, of course, there is a second part to this. In addition, until your next hero phase, models in this unit can pass across terrain features in the same manner as models that can fly. Important to note here is they don't have the fly keyword. So if something triggers off of fly or lack thereof, then this doesn't count. It's just saying they get to move as though. So, and it's only terrain features, not models, of course. All right, so the save is easy to calculate because there's only one thing that changes their save. So I'm going to do their save without using that ability, like their base stat save, which is similar to this one. It's 5 times 2 times 1.2, so that's 12. Then 5 times 1.5, 7.5 times 1.2, 9. 5 times 1.2, 6 times 1.2, 7.2, and then 6. That's the normal stat, which is empirically worse than what we have in the Immortus guard. But if you give them +1 to save, and remember, they can never get better. So the Immortus guard had a 3+ save. They can get to a 2+, but these guys can only ever get to a 3+, but you can choose that aspect for that combat phase to make them tankier. And of course, you could stack stuff to ignore rend and stuff, but essentially they're going up to the same profile as the other guys because then they're on a 3+. you'll notice that in my system here, if you do +1 save, then everything lines up from the second point, because this is at a 3+ save with no rend, and this is a 3+ save with 1 rend, but that's the same thing as a 4-up save. And so then you can see that they line up. And then of course you have one different number here at the beginning of this one because it's a 3+ save, and one different number here because it's a 4+ save with -3, which is no save. And then a 6+ ward, which makes it functionally 6. Again, if this stuff doesn't resonate for you, don't stress it. All right, so their main weapon is the Spirit Blades. I'm going to just go ahead and calculate it as though it's with exploding hits, because they're always getting that. So that's 4 times 16 over 36. No, sorry, I need to do better. This is +1, so that's times 20 over 36. That's 2.22 minus 2, which is, yeah, 33% worse than what the Immortus Guard were doing with their main weapon. But of course, these guys have some tools to expand that. So, for example, exploding hits and adding +1 to hit stack on top of each other. So if you did do this, it would be as though you made it, +1 to hit makes it a 2, and exploding hits functionally makes it a 1, which means 100% of the to hit goes through. I'm not going to explain that right now, but it is really strong. If you add 1 to wound rolls, then what you're doing is functionally, this is functioning on a 2+, 2+, which is also good. And then this one, adding 1 to the damage, you can see this is damage 1, so it just doubles the output. So you can see that would make it 4.44. So it's a flexible unit. I like that they're modular, they're faster, their save's worse, but they can kind of balance that back out. And they can run and charge, so they're faster in that sense too. Let's look at what the Dread Falchions do. That's 3 times 2 times 20 over 36. So 6, that's the same as before. So their main, their elite weapon has the same profile as the base weapon for the Immortus Guard. But then of course they can use these that applies to that. So that's pretty cool. Do I think these guys are worth 20 points extra? Definitely. I think the modularity of what they can do and their speed can definitely make a difference. But the Immortus Guard, I would say you're taking largely, for that bodyguard effect. And then maybe you get to fight twice. They are tankier too. So it's interesting that them being tankier as a unit that wants to take mortal wounds off of someone, because they don't get to make use of their save against that. So that's being lost a little bit, except for the situation where you might think, well, I want these guys to stick around as long as possible so I've got more mortal wounds to absorb. You can think of that 2+ as a ward save for your hero, but no ward save dies after a certain number of wounds have been allocated. Pretty much no ward saves we see. Whereas if you have a bodyguard unit, that ward save lasts only as long as these guys survive to keep absorbing those wounds. So that's a consideration. Anyway, but it does, if you're targeting them, it means that by targeting the hero and then he has to pass it on, then on a 2-up, it's going through to them, and then they don't get to make a ward save even, or make use of their save. So if you really want to kill this unit, you could target the hero around them. Whereas if you target this unit specifically with something other than mortal wounds, even with mortal wounds, they're getting the 6+ ward, but other than mortal wounds, then they're getting a 3+ save, which they could stack and then do some other stuff. So the easiest way to kill a Mortis Guard if they're standing next to a hero is to target the hero, which might seem counterintuitive, but that's kind of how it works. So anyway, yeah, I'm not going to finish calculating all the output for the Necropolis Stalkers, but on my own, I would do that. All right, so now we're on to our last two conditional battle line options. These get turned on with either Archon or Nagash in your list. These are the two big boys, the big flying guys that come in units of 2 for 200 points, I believe it was. Let me double check that. No, 240, sorry. 240. Keywords: Death, Ossiarch, Bone Reapers, Hecatos, so they also have that keyword. Morghast, and Morghast archai. So you might feel like if you're not too familiar with the keyword system, you might feel like this is like redundant. Their name is Morghast archai. That's why that's listed separately. But Morghast is listed separately as well because both of these units have that keyword. And there's probably a buff somewhere in the book that specifically gives out a buff to Morghast units in particular. It could come from a sub-faction maybe, or from a command trait artifact or a war scroll. Again, I haven't looked at anything, so you're seeing me looking at this for the first time. So let's take a look at the base idea here. I already knew that they were faster and they fly. They got 6 wounds apiece, so just that one extra wound on top of what the other guys were doing, the Immortus guard. And what was the name of the other dudes? The other dudes was Necropolis stalkers, right? Yeah. But, so they're still only counting as 2 wounds on objectives. So they're not monsters, even though they're almost monster size. But let's look. Each model in a Morghast archai unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: Spirit Halberd or Spirit Swords. All models in the unit must be armed with the same. So it looks like they've got 2 things, but it's just an or. Okay? All right. So enemy units cannot receive commands while they're within 3 inches of any friendly units with this ability. So if you're familiar with Zongor Enlightened on disc or just Zongor Enlightened on foot, they shut down command abilities being used in the combat phase when they're within 3 inches. These guys are doing it even worse. They're shutting it down. And I'm looking ahead, and the other version of these guys, the harbingers, they also have this ability. So this is shared by both Morghast units. Very strong. So we're shutting down. If you think about it, what could you be using when you're in 3 inches of someone? So when you're in combat. In the hero phase, well, you can't use rally, and you couldn't use, that's the main hero phase one, right? Yeah, maybe I'm forgetting something. But in the, I think it's just rally. In the movement phase, the only option is to retreat. So they're not getting a 6 auto run. And they're not getting redeploy, obviously, because they're not eligible. So that's not shutting down any of those. In the shooting phase, they can't use all-out attack or all-out defense. That said, this army is not really a shooting army, so it's not necessarily helping much there. But maybe if these guys were in combat and then you had Mortek Crawler. But if I remember from the Mortek Crawler, it used to do some kind of splash damage that maybe hit your own units. I don't know. So if that's the case, you wouldn't necessarily want to be shooting into these guys being in combat, but maybe that's changed. In the charge phase, obviously you've got reroll charges, but that doesn't apply to a unit that's in combat. And you've got Unleash Hell, also doesn't apply. And then in the combat phase, you've got all-out attack, all-out defense, and then you've got Battle Shock. You've got your Inspiring Presence. So functionally, what this really is shutting down is all-out attack, all-out defense, and Inspiring Presence. That's most of it, because you're already within 3 inches, and that in itself implicitly shuts down the rest. It's also, of course, shutting down random command abilities that individual armies have access to, which could be great, but it's still great, and it's not just in the combat phase. So shutting down Inspiring Presence is great and feels on brand for a death army. Grim Opponents. If you make an unmodified charge roll, I'm going to underline that. They don't have a charge bonus themselves, but maybe you can get one somewhere else, so that's good to know. Of 8+ for this unit. So for example, Chronomatic Cogs could give it to them. Of 8+, the strike first effect applies to this unit until the end of that turn. Okay. And that is also shared by the other unit. So, okay. And then lastly, Necromantic Custodians. This unit has a ward of 5+ if it is wholly within 12 inches of any friendly Ossiarch Bone Reaver's heroes. Okay. So this is a good point to what I was saying before about there was a Ossiarch command that gives you +1 to your faction ward save. I forget what it's called. Maybe it's Deathless Minions or something like that. These guys are not getting a +1 to this ward because this ward is caused by this rule and has nothing to do with the faction ward save. So they are running on a 6+ ward base. They're on a 5+ if they either are on the 6+ and receive that command. that Ossiarch command, or if they're wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Ossiarch Bone Reaper hero, which seems like obviously a power pair you want to do. And then you can save your command points for something else. So that's pretty cool. Interestingly, this is the first unit we've seen that doesn't issue commands to itself. So kind of interesting. All right, so let's take a look at the profile. 6 wounds here. I'll just go ahead and do the bracket here. I'm going to first do it with the 1.2 ward. So that's 7.2 times 2 is 14.4. And then, let's see, 6 times 1.5, 9 times 1.2, 10.8. And then, oh, I did that wrong. Sorry, 12 times, the first one I did wrong. Let's see, 12 times 1.2. Oh, I did that right, sorry. And then 7.2, which would be 6 times 1.2 squared, is 8.64. And then, of course, no save puts us at 7.2. Now, this goes up because now we can do, instead of a 6+ ward, a 5+ ward. So that's 1.5 times whatever score you get. So 12 times 1.5 is 18. 9 times 1.5 is 13.5. 7.2 times 1.5 is 10.8. And then just simply 9, which is a base 6 times 1.5. So they're pretty tanky if they're getting that ward. And I'm already looking ahead to the next version of this unit, and they don't have that ward. So clearly, this is the defensive version because they share everything else. And by the way, they're elite, so they can issue commands themselves. Okay, let's do the weapons, keeping in mind that we're functionally receiving a +1 to hit from the exploding hits. So that's 3 times 3, 9 times 20 divided by 36. That's 5.00 at -2. Definitely not a bad stat line. Now, you're only getting 2 of these guys for 240, which is the same price as fulminators. They do have strike first if they charge on an 8+, unlike fulminators. They're shutting down commands, and they're either carrying a weapon that does this, so 10 at -2, 5+ ward. Yeah, I don't know. They're also filling a gap in this army. They have the same wounds characteristic as fulminators, but worse save, but a ward, and they are the same speed. They don't have a shooting attack. So it's easy to compare them to fulminators, but of course fulminators don't fly. So it's not exactly the same. And then if we look at the shorter range weapons at 10 attacks, or 5 times 2 is 10, times 20 divided by 36, this will be a little higher, 5.56. All right. Now, if you look at these two profiles, you're getting a very small improvement, which is a little bit more than a 10% improvement before you take into account the rend, but this has better rend, which I'm going to go ahead and tell you is probably better in most situations. This one's less swingy, but it's also got less range. I'm going to go for halberds every day, all day, every day. To me, it's I can tell you right now, mathematically, the swords are not the right answer. So sometimes you can if you know how the math works a little bit, you can make this decision right off the bat. If I had this army, I wouldn't build a single model with swords. Of course, it could change in the next book, but for exactly how it works right now, halberd is the way to go. It just is better. Unless they have really bad wards, really bad save characteristic, or you need more attacks for something like curse or something that triggers on to hit rolls, or you're just not into swingy stuff. But I would go the halberds every day, all day, every day, especially with that rend. Because remember, the higher rend is also compensating for the swinginess. So even though, okay, less attacks and more damage means there's a higher risk reward going on, the rend means if it gets past these stages, which are identical for both attack profiles, it's more likely to go through by a good bit, depending on what their save is. So I would go with the halberd. All right, let's move on to the harbingers. All right, so here we are. Basically the same profile. We got the same move, wounds, save, bravery. We got the same keywords, except they've got their own Morghast harbingers. They're elite as well. They fly. They've got the Heralds of the Accursed One for shutting off command abilities if they're in combat. The same unmodified charge for strike first. Let's see, weapon options. Spirit, halberd, and swords. Yep, it's exact same. And let's look at the profiles. 2 inch, 3, 3, 3, minus 2, 3. And 5 attacks, 3, 3, minus 1, 2. Exact same weapons. So the only thing that's different about this unit, they even have the same points cost, is this ability versus the ward. So they're going to be less tanky. During deployment, instead of setting up this unit on the battlefield, you can place it to one side and set it as soaring above the battlefield as a reserve unit. If you do so at the end of your movement phase, you can set up this unit on the battlefield more than 9 inches from all enemy units. This is the standard legalese for Deep Strike. It's not the kind that's bound to a board edge or anything like that, which technically has a different name in some games. But yeah, also no command ability. But they basically, you're sacrificing the potential. It's not always that the other unit gets a 5+ ward, but the potential for a 5+ ward, you're sacrificing that for the ability to put them in Deep Strike. Now remember, of course, it doesn't say it in this rule, but implied in the core rules is that if you're in reserve, you have to drop by the end of turn 3 or else you are dead. And there's nothing that changes their attack profile. So I can go ahead and write the same stats here for what I did above. And I would say the same thing that I would choose for the halberds. And their save is just the same as what the other units was without the 5+ ward option. So that'd be 14.4, 10.8, 8.64, and that's 9.2, evidently. Wait, is that right? Hold on. 6 times 1.2. Oh, 7.2. Yeah, good thing I caught that. Something seemed off about that. And that doesn't make sense because that would have been higher than the previous value. Okay, so anyway, clearly when you're deciding between these two conditional battle line units, I like these big dudes. I think they're fun. The Timmy part of me really likes using big guys and having elite armies. I don't know if it's smart, and we'll have to see what kind of buffs the army can give them. Obviously, they have their own keyword, Morghast. They can't issue a special command, but they can, of course, receive the other regular OCR commands and regular commands. They're techier pieces that hit pretty hard. I don't know if they're 100% the same. I think Fulminators are actually undercosted, if I'm being honest, and that these guys are just fine at their price point. I like being able to deep strike, but of course hitting a 9-inch charge is tough. But of course, if they hit that charge, then they're implicitly getting an unmodified 8-inch charge, unless they've got some amazing bonus. And so then they're getting strike first. So that's kind of cool if they do hit it. And of course, they're turning off command abilities. Oh, I should have said, when I was talking about these command abilities, Unleash Hell, it does shut off Unleash Hell because they first arrive and then they can't use it because they have to arrive first and then Unleash Hell. So I take that back. It does shut off Unleash Hell because that's the thing. Yeah. I don't know. I like the Deep Strike unit, but I think the other one's probably more tactical. It depends on how you play. You could try to go... This doesn't have any restrictions on how many units you have on the battlefield, so maybe it's possible to make a null deploy list with this, or a largely null deploy list. But I don't know if that's worth it. It depends on whether we can get some charge bonuses in some other places. So that remains to be seen for my reading through the book. All right.
And thanks again. We'll be continuing the series with many more videos to come, and we've got lots of stuff going on with Worlds at this time, so the release schedule of these videos might be a little bit delayed, but we'll get the series done in the next 6 weeks or so, if not sooner, hopefully. In the meantime, feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and keep the conversation going in the Discord. Thanks again, guys. Until next time, Ryan out.